Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. I'm your host, Stacey Harris, and joining me today for this conversation is our co-host, Cliff Stevenson, our Director of Research and Principal Analyst here at Sapient Insights Group. Cliff, welcome to the show.
Stacey, it is very exciting to be back.
I know. It seems like it's only 2 weeks in between recording these, but I'm always kind of like, there's just so much that goes on between those 2 weeks. I'm like, we've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
This week, we've got some really interesting stuff going on. We've got a couple of updates from Plum, which is an assessment tool that got some funding. You're going to give us a little bit of details on that. We got a new learning report from LinkedIn Learning. We'll talk about what that is and what it looks like and what it means. There's a lot of commentary on LinkedIn about it. I think it's worth kind of mentioning. We also have some updates on what's happening in the ChatGPT world. I know everybody's talking about it. We got to put our spin on it. I know it's kind of the prerequisite for being an analyst is you got to have an opinion on these things. Me and you, I think, are going to talk a little bit of a different take on it, which is the employee's perspective on this conversation. And then we did want to talk a little bit this afternoon also about what we're seeing happen in diversity, equity, inclusion space, and how we find that's changing in the market, just based off of what's happening with the layoffs and the market sort of resetting itself a little bit. You know, it's still a tight labor market. Is that impacting how people are addressing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in sort of today's market? We'll have some update on that. And if we have a little bit of time, there's some news and update on what's happening in other areas of artificial intelligence like Otter. We might combine that with the ChatGPT conversation. But I mean, not like big bang kind of stories, but lots of, I think, foundational stories that are going to really impact maybe how we think about things for the remainder of this year or even into the next couple of years, I think.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's that we're already in March. We're getting close to it, not to scare everyone, but, we're getting close to a third of the way through, but there's still a lot of uncertainty about how this year is going to go. So hopefully we can kind of take our own chance at looking into the crystal ball and making some predictions, but also giving a little advice based on what we've seen from our own research as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of, the fun thing about the work that we do is it's a cycle of research because of the fact that we do our annual HR system survey every year for those who might not know that work that we do. And because of the fact that it's a cycle, we get to do this really great process where we assess every year at this time of the year, sort of what questions should we be asking? And so this is probably my favorite time of the year because I get to think a little bit more about sort of what's new and interesting and where the market is heading, because I've got to ask, and you've got to ask now the right questions about it. And then as we get into the data in the latter half of the year, then we have to kind of compare new against what we're seeing in the research. And that's kind of fun, but it's really interesting when we get to just kind of break down the walls a little bit and say, what should we be asking about? And so that's, I know, a lot of the conversations you and I are having right now. But, Cliff, this is, the first conversation we wanted to have today was about a vendor who they were in our research this year. We didn't get a ton of respondents of their clients. We're hoping to next year as they're growing. Organizations often get more respondents. Can you tell me a little bit about, the topic around investments and what we're seeing with the Plum numbers?
Yeah. So Plum, as you mentioned, they're a talent assessment platform. They raised $6 million. This is in a round of growth funding. And, there were a number of different investors. Pearson, I think, is the largest one that's in that. But there were some other ones, the Export Development Canada, Real Ventures, BDC Capital's Women in Technology Venture Fund, and the EduLab Capital Partners. Oh, and Impact Engine as well. So a lot of people are seeing some value in talent assessments going forward. And I know you've actually met directly with Plum. Is that right? You've briefed with them before, Stacey?
Yeah, we had a couple of briefings with them. And Caitlin, who is their CEO, who when I first met with them, I think it was back in 2020 almost, or maybe even the latter part of 2021. But, I was always impressed with the fact that when Caitlin first started talking about the work that they were doing with me, Caitlin McGregor is her name. It was very science focused. So if for those who don't know Plum, they're an assessment firm. They do psychologically, fundamentally based assessments for hiring, for career pathing. It's focused on soft skills versus sort of the hard skills, which we see assessments growing in both areas of soft and hard skills. And it's much more focused on a lot of data around how you remove bias from sort of the assessment process to ensure that you're asking about the things that an employee's capabilities are based off of. And that's always an interesting dialogue, right? Can you honestly remove bias from the assessment process? And if you're doing it that way through using assessment tools, can you then take that data and leverage it in a way to ensure that you have not just a diverse population that you're moving through your organization, both from hiring to retention to development, but that you're also ensuring that that population has the tools they need to succeed, which is one of the big things that Caitlin talks a lot about. And she's really, I think, the thing that for me, most assessment firms have to go through a lot of testing. They've got a lot of adverse impact studies, a lot of tests to make sure that they are fundamentally aligned with the work that you're planning to have that person who's taking the assessment do over time. So you have to be really careful about assessments, and you have to make sure they have done all that work. And one of the nice things when we did the briefing on this is not only did she talk about soft skills and the fact that they really have this approach they're taking to sort of a universal talent model, but she then showed me all the data behind the testing they had done, particularly the adverse impact studies. And to me, that kind of warmed my heart. I'm like, oh, this is someone who gets it, that, she's not just going to tell me how this can solve all your problems. She's more importantly telling me that they've done all the hard work to make sure that the tool isn't going to have an adverse impact, which is probably the scariest thing when it comes to assessment tools and any kind of selection tool. So yeah. I think it's interesting to see that when in a market when we have this really a real struggle to get funding. I'm here talking to a lot of small businesses who are not particularly able to get A, B, and C funding right now, that Plum was able to get this additional funding right now, which means people believe in what's happening in this selection process and using assessments in that space. You've done a lot of work in assessments. Do you find that we've seen a lot of consolidation there as well? Do you think there's a bit of a new market being built around it right now, Cliff?
I think so. I think that interestingly, you've hit upon the theme, or at least I'm starting to realize there's a theme to a lot of the news that we've been seeing lately, which is where do we truly see technology being able to help us do our jobs better and take a more humanistic approach to our jobs? And I think that's where some of this is being seen. So yeah, I think that there's a market for assessments in the way that it takes, the bias out as much as you can. I think that the trick is to show your homework, right? Show your math. Show me how exactly this is being done, not just promise me this is going to remove bias, because of course that can't be done, right? We are the ones programming the machines. Therefore, we can't completely remove our own biases. But if we are made aware of them, we can hopefully act to work to mitigate those biases. And I think another thing that's driving the interest in assessments is a real interest in skills, which I think leads us in to the second topic as well. But I think it's something that we are also seeing in our research is a real strong interest in understanding skills and competencies at a very granular level, and getting a sort of true assessment, see, there we go, of people and their skills, so that when changes happen, because now we know for sure they will happen, what skills do we have to adopt to the new market or the new way of doing business? So if you don't mind me segueing into the second topic, then.
Definitely. And I think the only add I would make to the comment you just made is that there is this, I think, sometimes preference for hard skills sometimes over the soft skills, because hard skills tend to be a little bit more easily accessible, much more easily aligned to the job, which makes them a lot more defensible when you go through any kind of EEOC concerns or anything like that. But the soft skills, I think the things you just talked about, being able to adapt, being able to address change, those soft skills are the things that oftentimes transcend what school you went to or what background you might have had growing up or what skills you were trained on, and give an organization opportunity to move people into new roles, understanding that, those soft skills can be transferable and they can focus on training the hard skills, right? So that was an interesting, I think, dynamic we often forget when we talk about skills.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think the fact that we're learning how to quantify those because they're extremely important. And, going back to this idea that we'll talk about some more too, of using technology to do the things that technology does better than people, so that people can do the things that they do better than technology, if that's not a tortured sentence, because those soft skills are, the human, right, in HR. And I think that that's maybe an even better segue into this LinkedIn Learning report that was about, the actual title was Building the Agile Future, Learning and Development Puts People and Skills at the Center of Organizational Success. And this was a report that LinkedIn Learning put out using a group of industry analysts as well as practitioners. And it was really focused on some of these soft skills, as well as, just skills in general that are related to agility. And there were a lot of things that were focused on the practitioners, such as championing D&I, being able to understand data better, prioritizing their own learning, right? Making sure that they understand what's going on so they can better explain these sort of new ideas to people going out there. So among other things, I think it shows, again, that LinkedIn Learning, who we have some data on, I believe Stacey as well, has really seen that the market is interested in how this idea of skills and agility interact.
Yeah, it's interesting because LinkedIn Learning is a Microsoft product, and it's, we're definitely seeing Microsoft step into the space and want to lead the people component in many cases of the business side of the world, right? At least on the process side, the learning side, the development side, the engagement side. And it's been interesting to see sort of LinkedIn come right behind with, not only do we have the recruiting, but now, and many people may not know this, LinkedIn Learning was their acquisition several years back of lynda.com. So it was a really robust catalog of learning applications that then had put on top of it, I think, some pretty positive approaches to how you track, manage, think about skills. It's not, I would say, as highly sophisticated as a full-blown LMS would be in many of those cases, but it's got a lot of the features that are necessary for a basic small business to manage learning in their organization. And that came through in our research, as you noted this year, right? We saw that LinkedIn Learning, Microsoft LinkedIn Learning, achieved one of the top 5 user experience ratings of I think we had 55 different learning solutions on our list this year that people were evaluating. And so to get in the top 5 is a pretty big deal, especially in the user experience side. And, I've had people push back and say, well, they're not a full LMS. And that's correct. But that when people think about their learning solutions, they don't think about just one primary LMS. Oftentimes they think about all the tools they're using to create a learning environment. And I think LinkedIn Learning is definitely becoming a big part of what is the future of the learning environment for a lot of organizations, because it's connected to the world of networking, collaboration, the soft skills, the area where that you noted was critical. The other thing I think, I looked through this report. It was a lot of the analysts kind of talked about it. Danny, who's one of our good friends from Red Thread Research, is in here and mentioned, and it was really great to see her get a chance to get quoted in what I think is a fairly nice, well put together report. I was a little bit frustrated. I kept trying to look for, they've got a lot of stats and charts in here. And whenever I look at a report, I want to know where those stats and charts come from. Did they do the survey? Are these coming from other papers and other research efforts? I couldn't quite tell. I went through this. And so for me, my big comment to them is just make sure you're very clear on where the data is coming from. And if, you're getting it, if it is a survey or if it's from external data, make sure we know where it's linked from. But that was really probably the only thing that I saw in here that I struggled with a little bit, is that some of the data points I weren't sure where they were coming from. And to me, that's a big deal. But I
That's
think
because you embraced the fourth of the six priorities. You've improved your data literacy.
I worked really hard to improve the data literacy. I was talking, someone linked in with me the other day. It was so sweet. They were talking about how they had seen an article that we had written on data analytics and the power of people data and how you could leverage it in HR Executive Magazine. And she said, I need to make this one of my big things for a journey this year. She said, I tended to run away from math. And I was like, it's surprisingly enough, I did as well when I was younger. I have found that as much as you run away from it, it's coming for you one way or the other. But yeah, no, I think that what they did hit on that I think is really important in those points you were mentioning is not just things like improving data literacy and prioritizing your learning and honing your focus. That's all kind of good modern day business practices. The one I thought was interesting was activate people managers. Mm-hmm. We sometimes underestimate the power and the amount of responsibilities on the shoulder of our people managers. And they oftentimes get the brunt of, why isn't this working? Why aren't your people learning? Why aren't you doing development? Much more of the negative. But, I love that language of activate, because I think if you give them the right tools and the time and the resources, people managers can be your best and most amazing, secret weapon in sort of gaining market share and improving engagement and building, company culture, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's so much focus on, we talk about frontline and executives, and then we forget about the people in the middle, which are no less important, and I would probably argue just as important.
But, moving from LinkedIn Learning to another that's more technology. They've got AI. They're using a lot of data to make some assumptions. But ChatGPT was the next thing we were going to bring up.
Oh, yeah. That's what people have been waiting for us to talk about. So
I'll let you start, Cliff, because you have different thoughts on this.
Let's go. This is probably, we'll try and talk about the other topics. This is going to be the big one. So ChatGPT, it's already being used in so many technologies that we see. You may already find out that it is what is underlying some of the technology at the chatbot that you're using at your vendor now. As we found out, it's pretty prevalent. Where you mostly see it in the news, and what this particular story is about, is that employees, this is from a Fishbowl survey, by the way, employees are using ChatGPT and other AI tools at work, but they're not telling their bosses. They found in this survey that more than 1/3 of workers said that they'd used AI tools for work-related tasks. I think that's pretty broad, sure. But 68% of these respondents said that they were doing so without first informing their bosses, and that they were using it for things like creating resumes and cover letters, copywriting, coding, and drafting sales and marketing emails. And so, yeah, that's the story. And Stacey, I'll give you first crack at this.
Well, I think it's important to know kind of where ChatGPT came out of, right? For those who may not, follow the news, right? ChatGPT was actually developed of a company or organization called Open AI, which is a nonprofit, but a nonprofit that is funded by a lot of different investors, including Microsoft and some charitable foundations and some ventures. And it is an organization that supposedly their statement is, right, OpenAI is a research and deployment company with a mission to ensure that artificial general intelligence benefits all humanity. It reminds me of the days when Google their big mantra was to do no harm. I think it was Google that did that, right? So ChatGPT is what they call a trained model which interacts in a conversational way. The dialogue format makes it possible for it to answer follow-up questions, supposedly admit mistakes, challenge incorrect premises, reject inappropriate requests. And now we've seen that Microsoft and a couple others have built on top of it the ability to input things and then it will put things back out to you. And that's probably the most interesting thing that we're seeing happen with it, right? And what I'm trying to figure out, right, in sort of all the different commentary from everybody in the market is that there's a mixture of, well, it can't do my job, defensiveness that's going on. There's a mixture of, oh my gosh, it's gonna take all of our secrets, defensiveness. And then there's a mixture of, is this the future of the world starting to be taken over, right? Which gets all the way down to the really paranoid side of sort of artificial intelligence. I think there is, like any other solution, we should treat it like like an immature level product, right? Like when the first, I'll never forget when the first smartphones came out. One of my first smartphones that I had was just prior to the iPhone coming out. It was 2000. I'll never forget this because it was early 2006 that I had one of the early smartphones, and I had a family member who got into a car accident, and I had to make a phone call. And I can remember holding this phone in my hand, going, my brain, because it was working on sort of overload, trying to make this interaction to get the phone call I needed to help someone, could not fathom how to use this new phone because my brain wasn't working the way it needed to work. I was back on sort of human memory where you're basically just reacting. And I was like, why is this phone not able to make the phone call I need it to make? Right. And I think with all technology, we've got to remember that the earliest uses of it are probably not how it's going to look 5 years from now. And our phones ended up not becoming the primary phone tool, right? Like what they end up becoming was our primary data gathering and data information tool, right? My sense with ChatGPT is that, yes, in the future, what we're going to see is that it's going to probably be a little bit more like an aggregated tool. And the people who've used it that way are definitely getting, I'd say, more value out of it in their everyday lives, but they also have to understand what it's aggregating. So your point earlier about you've got to know what the math is, you've got to know where it's getting the data from. We do know that particularly some of the things we've seen off of Bing and a couple of the other ones, that there's a lot of false data out there. So if it's aggregating false data, you're getting false information, right? And so the other thing is that if you're inputting something for it to look at to then sort of build something off of, you end up with this issue where your IP might then be out there in the market. And that's a bit concerning. So you've got to be careful about what you feed it back, right? Because and with our employees using it and us not exactly knowing how they're using it, that could be a bit of an issue. But I will say, there's a lot of power in employee figuring out how to work a bit smarter. And I do think we want to elevate that conversation. I remember when I found Calendly, I thought it was the best day of my life because it reduced the amount of emails I had to go back and forth on. And I don't know that I really thought about it as being a company-wide tool until I was running my own company around it, right?
Right.
And leveraged it inside of that. So I don't know, Cliff. I mean, it's a long-winded answer to your question.
No, but it's a big topic. And and I'd like to, I love that you explained it though at the beginning for the people who don't watch the news or don't listen to the news, but they do listen to this. And thank you, whoever those people are that get your news from us. I think that that's the best way to do it. So, I think you've hit right on it. You mentioned at the beginning, kind of the people that are, oh no, this is going to take my job, and the people are scared by it. I think there's also one other group, which is the people who are, oh boy, this will do my job, right? Which I think is kind of what you were saying, with the people who see this as a future. And there are certain use cases where, sure, it makes sense to use this like any other technology to reduce the amount of time doing mundane, repetitive tasks. The Calendly link is a perfect example, right? Because we've all been there, right? We've gone, okay, are you open Tuesday at 11? No, I could do Tuesday at 12. No, Tuesday at 12, no good, and that goes on forever. And so having that simplified is great. Now, there's also the possibility that it's something more akin to, I don't know, the metaverse or something like that, where it's like, I don't really see a use case in most, except in very specific situations. In this case, I think that there are some use cases to do certain tasks, but the examples they give, something like cover letters, that would be a very bad use case, even in the best scenario, because at the end of the day, no matter how good this technology is, it can't and shouldn't replace your own voice and your own ability to compose this, right? Because you want to get across something that only a human can do, a sense of your own voice and your own opinions, your own viewpoint, your own unique way of speaking that can come across even in written text. If you are putting out outward facing communication as a company and you're using a tool and no one can tell whether that's what your company has written or what a robot has written, then I don't think you've done a very good job, right? Then because it shouldn't sound like that. It should sound like, oh, definitely a human wrote that. And nothing will ever be able to replicate that. But
We've
there are
talked
certain
about this
tasks
a lot recently, right? This is the issue of the voice, right? Everybody that's the power of the human is to have your own voice and things, right?
Yeah. But if it's something where you need a document that explains how to sort of use a new tool, right? And you write it and you're like, okay, look, just take this instruction manual and make it into a more coherent set of instructions, using these couple of examples so that it's, cut down and made a little more informal, then yeah, a machine that could do that, that's going to save you a lot of time. And those sort of things, in certain cases, yeah, there's a lot of value in that. But I think I would set at ease the fears of people worry about it taking their job. But I still think it's a lot of value there's a lot of, you should be interested in looking at it and understanding what it is and how it works, so that if there are opportunities in the future, or even if it's a requirement in the future to use tools like this, that you understand how they are best used and how they are best not used, if that makes sense.
Well, I think that's the closing remark on it. Know when not to use it is probably more important than to know when to use it, right? That maybe is the sign-off statement on that. And maybe this leads into the next conversation, because I know we only have a few moments on this, and I do want to get to it, which is this idea about, have diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging policies stayed strong in the light of layoffs at top tech companies. And, I bring this up in you might think, well, how do these two worlds connect? But when we think about aggregating data and we think about aggregating commentary and language, part of that is anonymizing everything. And I think the biggest thing, at least I've learned in the last several years about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, is that we're not trying to make everything look the same in the world that we're in, that we want to celebrate everybody's uniqueness and differences. And you can't do that if you just keep aggregating and aggregating and aggregating, right? And so I think there is a bit of a commentary here about being careful that AI doesn't create the language for our future, right? Because we want the language for our future to be based off of these very diverse opinions and people and unique conversations. So that, to me, is very, very connected to this. So you, Cliff, picked up on this particular conversation that's happening in the market. Can you maybe walk us through a little bit what's happening?
Right. So this was a report I think XTX Central put out, but they're referencing a lot of other research, the tech layoff report 2023. And this was just published on February 20th, by the way. So this is very new data that's coming out. But basically what we're seeing is that of the layoffs that are happening, especially in tech, they are disproportionately affecting HR. That talent sourcing and other HR positions tend to be the most affected at some very large tech companies. And we also saw that D&I leaders, along with talent acquisition and recruiting, made up between 33 and 66% of the layoffs within those companies that are doing layoffs, right? So companies are laying off between 7 and 15% of their workforce in tech, but those particular groups are making up a very large proportion of those layoffs. And that will have a large effect on, things like DI programs, employee resource groups, which tend to be cut as well, which really shows that it is up to us as HR leaders to really prove the value of these as drivers of business, something that companies have said that, yes, they see it, but then they clearly don't, right? Because their actions prove that they see these sort of initiatives as the first to be cut. They clearly are, costs rather than value add groups. So, finding that again, intersection between the humanity and the technology is important. And like you said, not just seeing these sort of large groups, but really seeing the individuals within them and understanding how our actions impact certain groups is extremely important, not just turning a blind eye to it.
Yeah. First of all, I one of the things I just wanted to make a comment on, because I think I said it, you said, we both say it tends to be really easy to say diversity, equity, inclusion programs. The nice thing that we saw in this most recent round of changes and impacts was that we were shifting away from programs and moving into diversity, equity, inclusion as part of our business model, as part of how we work, right? That. We still know there's a lot of programs out there, right? Like that is oftentimes a starting point. But the ideal was one of the big stats that we saw in 2021 was that we were seeing organizations not just hiring a diversity, equity, inclusion role, but hiring teams, right? Which meant they were creating models and teams to see the kind of cuts that you're seeing here in those particular companies. Now, that's not across the board. One of the things that's very big in the market, I think if you talk to most pundits, anybody who watches the data, we're actually not seeing as many layoffs overall, right, as people sort of thought we were going to have, and even as we may have had even just in general regular times, right? So I think it is the tech industry where this is being hit the hardest. But yeah, it is this sort of gut-wrenching sort of conversation to have that, tech companies were oftentimes the loudest, the most vocal sort of, we're going to change the world in our approach to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and make sure our products are more diverse, and make sure our approaches are thinking about bias at a higher level. To know that seems to be the direction when you look at the data, not what they're saying, which is always the most important thing. Yeah, it's heart-wrenching and frustrating. And I can't even imagine, we work on the edges of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging from a technology perspective, but I know a lot of people who have developed so much what I think is the new thinking around this in this space right now. And I'm sure they're very frustrated with where this is at right now.
Yeah. And to even pile on the sort of sadness, this research by 365 Data Analysis, which was also mentioned, found that women were disproportionately let go at 56%. So in those sort of cases, I think it's just extremely important when we're working to really think about how these layoffs sort of impact our business and really understand the groups that we're letting go. I mean, it's never an easy decision to be made, but really look at the data when you're making these decisions and understand if you are disproportionately affecting a certain group, because you may be, and that may be a cause for concern. It may mean that there's something else going on. Some bias has not been removed. Right, then there may need to be a way to take a more objective look at how this goes. So in that case, that kind of brings it back, I think, a little bit into how technology can help us. So as we talked about right at the beginning of making these assessments with a more nuanced, but at the same time, a more objective eye.
Yeah. One of the things I think probably in the next couple of months, you're going to see come out from us is another sort of mini report on performance management and technology, because we've been asked a lot of questions about it recently. We have some data around it that we just wanted to pull out and share. And to me, this really gets back to when you're laying people off, if you're doing it, well, we can't speak to sort of some of the craziness that happened with Elon Musk and those kind of environments. But if you're sort of taking a really sort of numbers driven approach to it, sometimes it's your performance management process elevates professionals who just have an easier time working in your environment, right? And one of the things that, I think diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging really needed time to develop inside a lot of these organizations is to look at those systemic issues where something like the performance management process might not really give you a full picture of what's happening, right? And so that's hopefully, and when you lose HR, you lose that kind of being able to look at it. It's just a bit of a snowball effect. So think about performance management, I think, along with all of these conversations that we just talked about here. I think it's a big part of, because you're making those decisions, if you're making them on data, is the data giving you what you really need to see from a context perspective. So boy,
Yeah.
so much. I mean, we run through our 30 minutes, Cliff, and we probably could have talked for another half hour on a lot of these topics. I do think it's probably for everyone to know a couple of quick things. In a few weeks, you're going to be heading to, I think it's Atlanta, right? That's
right, Atlanta, to go to talk to our friends over at ADP.
Yep. You can meet their event, Meeting the Minds, right? I'll be heading out to California for a couple of different events, and then possibly at the Phenom event as well, coming up in a few weeks. So if anybody's going to be at those events and they want to touch base with us, let us know. Also, just a quick reminder, you're getting ready to launch a report on small business data from our report. So that's what people should be watching for the next couple of weeks, correct?
That's right. And it'll have a focus there on technology, because these issues we've talked about, they affect small businesses, right? And there's a whole host of tools that are out there that can help you bridge that gap between the scary HR technology and the HR technology that can really help you out. And oftentimes it's the exact same technology.
Yeah. And small business for us is companies under 500 employees. And there's not a lot of research done, particularly in that space on technology. So we're hoping that'll shed some light for people in there. Yeah. And then just a quick reminder for our listeners, you can access, because I know we've referenced a couple of times the report here, our full key findings from the 2022-2023 annual HR systems report, as well as the summary findings, if you don't want to read 175 pages, on our website. 2 big buttons right there for download right at the front. And then also, just if you're interested in getting more in-depth data or support in your HR strategy journey, please drop us a line at info@sapientinsights.com to schedule some time to chat. Myself, Cliff, my team partners, Susan and Terry, would love to have a chat with you. Be sure to sign up for our newsletter to get ongoing updates on research launches and where we'll be speaking, like we just talked about, and visiting. When you can participate in the annual survey, May 9th, put that date in your calendar this year, guys. That's the first launch date for this year's annual HR system survey. And thanks, Cliff, for you, as always, pulling together some of the most interesting articles to have conversations about this week. I really appreciate all your help in that. Thanks to our production team, including Brand Method Media Group, who helps us produce our podcast, run by their amazing founder, Callie Kelly, and our marketing team, Lisa Renko and Zoe Britton, who make sure this all gets pulled together in a timely fashion and gets out to the team and to you as the audience. And most importantly, thanks to our listeners and community. We couldn't do this without you. We love sharing news, updates, insights, spilling the tea with you, and getting a chance to have conversations. And if you have anything you specifically would like us to talk about, any news that you think that is important, please be sure to email us, myself and or Cliff, and we'll make sure it gets on the news each week. That's it for our episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We hope it's been just the brew you needed to start the engines running this week. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review to stay up to date with immediate breaking HR tech news and all the behind the scenes content. You can follow me on LinkedIn at Stacey Harris, on Twitter at Stacey Harris HR, and on Instagram at Stacey Harris HR as well. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another pot of boiling hot HR tech updates and news. Thanks, everyone.